Ubisoft is in real trouble, and I'm sure most of you have already heard about the Assassin's Creed Shadows delay, right? Well, this delay is more than just your average postponement, it's revealing some deeper issues going on at Ubisoft. From financial struggles to a damaged reputation, things aren't looking too great for them. But don't worry, I'm going to break it all down in this video. I'll cover why this delay happened, what it says about Ubisoft's current state, and how things could potentially get worse. So, if you're curious about what's really happening behind the scenes, stick with me, because it's not looking good. Let's start with Ubisoft's official press release, which explained they delayed Shadows to give themselves more time to polish and refine the game. Fair enough, right? They've now moved the release date to February 14th, 2025. But there's more. Along with the delay, Ubisoft announced that the game will be available on Steam at launch. Plus, anyone who pre-ordered the game will get a refund, and future pre-orders come with the first expansion for free. We got even more info from an internal memo Ubisoft CEO sent to staff. In it, he announced the decision to delay Shadows and shared that Star Wars Outlaws sales were softer than expected. The memo mentions that Shadows is already playable and of high quality, so why the delay at such a late stage? Well, Ubisoft says they want to make sure the game is optimized across all platforms from day one. They want to remove small issues that would normally be fixed in post-launch updates. They're also using the extra time to add some high-impact secondary quests to make the game even more memorable. Honestly, this all sounds great, but I couldn't help but chuckle when the CEO reminded his staff that players today expect polished games at launch. Like, no kidding, right? But here's where things get worse. Ubisoft shares have plummeted since the Shadows delay, and the disappointing sales of Star Wars Outlaws. They've lowered their financial targets for the fiscal year and now expect to just break even. Their Q2 performance was worse than expected, and the company's shares have dropped significantly, down from €85 per share in February 2021 to around €10 now. That's a massive fall. Because of this poor performance, Ubisoft's executive committee is now reviewing the company's strategy and execution, looking for ways to better focus on what players want. If that wasn't enough, there's even talk of Ubisoft being sold. AJ Investments, a small activist investor group, is pushing for Ubisoft to be sold, and they've got the support of about 10% of the company's shareholders. They're also advocating for current CEO, Yves Guillemot, to be replaced. Ubisoft's largest shareholder is the Guillemot family, with 15%, followed by Tencent, which owns just under 10%. So yeah, Shadows delay is a big deal. Ubisoft isn't just delaying their biggest game, they're scrapping early access, refunding pre-orders, offering a free expansion, and launching on Steam. Something seems up. Maybe the pre-order numbers weren't what they had hoped for, or maybe the momentum slowed after a strong start. Offering a free expansion could be a move to keep those initial pre-orders coming back. Also, thank goodness they've dropped that pay extra to play 3 days early nonsense. Hopefully that trend dies out quickly. It's also worth noting that every mainline Assassin's Creed game since AC2 has released in October or November, even if the game wasn't fully ready. Looking at you, Unity. So this shift to February is a big deal, and it likely signals something serious happening internally. Plus, mid-February might be the latest Ubisoft can push the game to still save their fiscal year, but the idea that October to November is the peak period isn't really true anymore. Just look at Elden Ring, Horizon, and Zelda. All had huge launches in February. Baldur's Gate 3 released in August, and Cyberpunk came out in December. So if a game is big and highly anticipated, the release date doesn't matter as much anymore. Just a few days ago, Assassin's Creed Shadows was set to release in a few weeks, but now it's delayed. Here's the thing, this delay didn't come out of nowhere. There were a few signs along the way that something was up with Shadows. Unlike previous major Assassin's Creed releases, the marketing for Shadows has been weaker and less consistent. Back in May, the reveal was done nicely. The first teasers and CGI trailer were great. Then, in June, we got our first gameplay showcase, which looked solid, especially the stealth gameplay. The showcase was over 13 minutes long, a decent amount of gameplay to show off. But after that, the promotional efforts slowed down. Sure, there were some screenshots and updates, but nothing substantial to build more hype. By now, we should have seen a story trailer, gameplay deep dives, or even some hands-on preview events to keep the excitement going. Another sign that something was off was when Episode 2 of the Shadows Dev Diary leaked online. Yet Ubisoft still hasn't officially released it. Then there was a big sign. Ubisoft Japan canceled their online exhibition at Tokyo Game Show 2024, which was scheduled for September 26th. They apologized for the last-minute notice, but it definitely felt like something was wrong. This delay, especially so close to the original release date, has caused even more bad press. Instead of people thinking Ubisoft is polishing the game, many are now wary of its quality. And then there's the Yasuke controversy. Yasuke, one of the protagonists, is a black man of African origin, a real historical figure portrayed as a samurai in the game. Ever since the first CGI trailer showed Yasuke, Shadows has been targeted by a vocal group of people unhappy with his portrayal. This vocal minority doesn't like seeing Yasuke as a samurai and hopes the game fails because of it. This has created a toxic and negative discussion around the game, which is disappointing, especially since the game itself looks promising. Yes, millions of people are still excited about the game and can't wait to play it. But this vocal minority, who honestly may not even be true fans of the series, has made the pre-release discourse quite unpleasant. This could hurt the game's sales significantly. But it's not just Shadows facing this kind of outrage. These days, there seems to be a small but very vocal group of people online who are always looking for the next thing to be angry about. Sometimes it feels like they're more interested in seeing games fail than in actually playing them. Of course, there are reasonable complaints too, and it's totally okay for gamers to demand better products. But a lot of the time, the loudest complaints, like the Yasuke controversy, are just silly. So, whether for reasonable or frankly very silly reasons, there are many waiting for Shadows to fail. Beyond the Yasuke controversy, Ubisoft's reputation is also playing a huge role in how people perceive Shadows. People are unhappy with many of their recent games. Buggy launches, bad microtransaction practices, and just general mediocrity. All this outrage, combined with Ubisoft's declining reputation, has been affecting Shadows' prospects. Now, with the delay, things have gotten worse. Shadows is also the first Assassin's Creed game to be released exclusively for current-gen consoles, leaving behind older ones. By doing so, according to Ubisoft, they can include many new tech features to evolve the game, which is cool. But the last time an Assassin's Creed game released only for new systems, leaving the old ones behind, was Assassin's Creed Unity, which was released almost exactly a decade before Shadow's original release. After its launch, Unity became infamous for its technical problems, which heavily damaged both the series and Ubisoft's reputation. Sure, other Assassin's Creed games have had issues at launch, but none as bad as Unity. The graphical issues and bugs were so widespread that Ubisoft had to issue a public apology and offer compensation in the form of the free Dead Kings expansion. Players who had bought the season pass were also given a free copy of another Ubisoft game of their choice. Unity's disastrous launch was one of the main reasons Ubisoft took a break from releasing a new Assassin's Creed game every year. After Syndicate launched, they skipped a year, partly because Unity had left such a bad taste in people's mouths. Even though Syndicate was in much better shape, it sold fewer copies, thanks to the damage Unity had done to the series' reputation. It was in February 2016 that Ubisoft finally announced they wouldn't release any new Assassin's Creed games that year, citing feedback and lessons learned from Unity. With Shadows, Ubisoft will want to avoid repeating that history. If there are major issues like the ones we saw with Unity, or even smaller ones that impact gameplay, a buggy launch would be the last thing they want. Recent Ubisoft games haven't performed well in terms of sales. For example, their latest big title, Star Wars Outlaws, suffered from poor sales and performance issues at launch. This has been a recurring problem for Ubisoft. They seem to keep making the same mistakes. Ubisoft really needs to focus on releasing bug-free games, especially given the hit their reputation has taken. Although their big titles are often solid, they haven't produced anything that feels like Game of the Year material in a long time. To succeed, Ubisoft needs to break this cycle. Reputation they've built of releasing buggy and unpolished games means that even when they release a solid title, players are quick to assume the worst. The launch of Unity created lasting skepticism that still affects every Assassin's Creed release. Even Star Wars Outlaws made things worse by reinforcing that skepticism. Another issue is burnout from Ubisoft's repetitive formula. Even when they deliver a well-executed game, many players feel like it's just more of the same. Open world fatigue has set in because so many of their games follow a familiar structure. As a result, players overlook the positive aspect of their games. Even a polished Ubisoft game can feel too safe, too predictable. Ubisoft has been trying different things, but it clearly hasn't been enough. The last Assassin's Creed game to score over 85 on Metacritic was Black Flag in 2013. That was over a decade ago. And let's not forget the microtransactions. No matter how good the core gameplay is, Ubisoft games tend to be weighed down by excessive microtransactions. Even if players enjoy the experience, the presence of these predatory monetization practices drags down the overall product, making it harder for people to fully embrace the game. That said, with Shadows, Ubisoft is introducing a lot of cool changes and innovations, especially with its stealth gameplay. Light and dark play a big role in stealth in Shadows. There's a new global illumination system that creates dynamic light and shadows, which affect how easily enemies can spot us. We'll be able to hide in the shadows and even create more darkness by destroying lanterns or taking out enemies carrying torches. There's even a light meter on the screen now, showing how visible or hidden we are, from fully visible to completely concealed. We can also crawl in a prone position for better stealth, and there's even the option to knock out enemies instead of killing them, allowing for a more pacifist approach. Another cool addition is the season system. The game progresses through spring, summer, autumn, and winter as we move through the campaign. And it's not just for show. Each season affects gameplay. NPCs behave differently depending on the season, and dynamic weather effects like fog, snow, and wind impact how well enemies can see or hear us. Then there's the return of the Hidden Blade combat, something fans have been asking for. Naoi's Hidden Blade can pivot and transform into a tanto, a small Japanese sword allowing for both stealth and close combat. Double assassinations are also back after 9 long years. Other cool changes include Naoi having a grappling hook, which we can use to traverse the environment and do things like climb into ceiling spaces above corridors, waiting to ambush enemies patrolling below. Ubisoft is also changing long-time mechanics like synchronization points. Now, when we climb to the top of them, our map won't be cluttered with icons, and we won't get the typical spinning drone-like shot of the area. Instead, from these high spots, we can spot highlighted points of interest to check out once we're back on the ground. All these changes have me hyped for the game. Now, let's talk about another issue Ubisoft has created within the Assassin's Creed series. They've unintentionally divided their fan base by creating different types of games. On one hand, you've got the classic Assassin's Creed games up until Syndicate, which are more action-adventure and stealth-focused. On the other hand, you've got the recent RPG-style games like Odyssey and Valhalla. Newer fans prefer the RPG format, while longtime fans often yearn for the old-school style. Sure, some enjoy both, but a lot of people are now only interested in one version of Assassin's Creed. We saw this clearly with Mirage. Fans of the recent RPGs found it lacking, while those who loved the classic AC games appreciated it for returning to the series' roots. With Shadows, Ubisoft is trying to strike a balance by bringing back certain classic features, like more stealth-focused gameplay, while keeping the RPG mechanics. But for some fans, it's still not enough. Many just aren't interested because they see Shadows as yet another RPG entry in the series. So it seems like the AC series is having an identity crisis. Does it want to stick to the newer RPG formula, or go back to the classic Assassin's Creed roots? Ubisoft doesn't seem too sure, but one thing they're definitely sure about, regardless of this style: microtransactions. Whether it's a classic game or an RPG, Ubisoft always finds a way to pack in those in-game purchases. It's something that frustrates a lot of players, and rightfully so. Now, Ubisoft might have hoped for Shadows to generate more hype because it's set in feudal Japan, a setting fans have been asking for since the early days, but here's the thing: they might have waited too long. We've already had big titles set in Japan, like Ghost of Tsushima, which was a massive hit, and while Ghost of Tsushima wasn't a true Assassin's Creed game, it offered a lot of what AC fans wanted. Sure, the parkour, Hidden Blade, and Assassin Brotherhood storyline were missing, but Tsushima still came close enough for a lot of AC fans. Now, Ghost of Yotei, the sequel to Tsushima, is set to come out around the same time as Shadows. Both games are set in Japan around the same time period, although Shadows takes place a little earlier, starting in 1579, while Ghost of Yotei is set in 1603. These games will definitely have differences, like Shadows featuring large cities, castles, and new tech like seasonal changes and light darkness mechanics, which might not be present in Ghost of Yotei. However, Ghost of Yotei has one thing Shadows lacks: a solid reputation. The good news is that Shadows will release early in 2025, while Ghost of Yotei is likely to drop later in the year. So while they might not clash at launch, comparisons are inevitable. Ubisoft is clearly aware of the competition, but they've insisted there's enough room for both games in the market. Still, it's hard to ignore that Shadows is going up against some heavy hitters in 2025. Besides Ghost of Yotei, you've got Avowed, Civilization VII, Kingdom Come Deliverance II, and Monster Hunter Wilds, all coming out around the same time. Ubisoft needs a big win here, especially after the underperformance of Star Wars Outlaws. Now, let's talk about the Animus Hub. This could be another reason for the delay. While this is pure speculation, knowing Ubisoft, it's possible. The Animus Hub is set to debut with Shadows, and from what we know, it could be a big deal for Ubisoft moving forward. All new AC games, starting with Shadows, will be connected to this hub, making it a central feature in the series. It could even change how the modern-day parts of the series work, making them more connected and engaging. It's also being said that the hub might allow for smaller, bite-sized AC experiences like mini side adventures that otherwise wouldn't make sense as full games. I think that's a pretty cool idea. It could even showcase older titles in a more interesting way, kind of like the Helix menu we saw in Unity. You might see something like Live the Life of a Pirate in Black Flag, or Explore the Streets of Revolutionary Paris in Unity. Sounds cool, right? But here's the worrying part: microtransactions. If we know Ubisoft, we know they love squeezing in as many microtransactions as possible. And rumors suggest the Animus Hub will house an in-game shop, offering cosmetics, battle passes, and more. It's not hard to imagine this turning into a predatory cash grab. Ubisoft might have delayed Shadows to figure out how to handle these microtransactions, especially with the negative press surrounding them recently. Lastly, let's talk about Ubisoft's notorious practice of offering multiple expensive game editions. Some editions cost nearly twice as much as the base game. This whole thing of showing off multiple expensive editions during marketing can really put people off. It gives the impression that you need to spend more to get the real game, even if that's not true. And let's not forget how Ubisoft games often get deep discounts just a few months after release. This strategy makes players think twice about buying the game at launch. I mean, why pay full price when you know the game's going to be 50% off in just a few months? So, can Shadows overcome all these issues and be a success? Well, it's possible, but for that to happen, the game needs to be near perfect. We're talking a 90+ score on Metacritic, minimal bugs, and smooth performance across the board. The fact that it's launching on Steam is great, since it'll reach a broader audience, but with Steam comes review bombing, and everyone will be able to see player counts. If the numbers are low or drop off quickly, it could further damage the game's reputation. Shadows is Ubisoft's most important Assassin's Creed game in years. It's more than just another Assassin's Creed game, it's the game that could make or break Ubisoft right now. It's been 4 long years since Valhalla, and while Mirage was a nice smaller scale game, it didn't come close to the success of bigger titles like Odyssey. But Shadows? This is the big one. If it fails, it could have serious consequences for Ubisoft's future. Personally, I'm hopeful. There are a lot of new and exciting features in Shadows that have me hyped, but I'm cautious. If a delay means a better game, then I'm all for it. Ubisoft needs a win, and I'm rooting for Shadows to deliver.